The night I realized I was invisible began the same way all my worst nights do, with me smiling at a room full of strangers and pretending I belonged. The Whitmore Hotel had a ballroom that swallowed you whole. Ceilings so high you couldn't see where the chandeliers ended and the dark began. And the light they threw was the kind that made wealthy women glow and women like me look slightly lost. I'd worn a dress that cost more than 2 weeks of grocery money, pale rose silk that Julian had chosen, not me, and heels that had started pinching my left foot somewhere around the third hour of standing near people whose names I was supposed to remember. The marble floor beneath those heels was cold and hard and completely unforgiving. I remember thinking, even the ground here doesn't want you to stop moving. Julian Cross was across the room, laughing at something a man in a charcoal suit was saying. He'd been laughing like that all night. Big, easy, practiced. The kind of laugh that said, I belong here, and you should want me to. I watched him the way you watch something that used to make sense. He'd been so warm when he picked me up at my apartment. He'd touched the small of my back and said, You look beautiful, Clara. And I'd felt it then, that brief, bright warmth of being wanted. I should have known better than to hold on to it. With Julian, warmth had a shelf life, and it always expired before the night was over. You're Julian's girlfriend? A voice to my left. I turned to find a woman in architectural red, sharp cheekbones, sharper smile, looking me over in that particular way wealthy women do when they've already made their decision and are simply gathering evidence. Her name was Beatrice Harrow. I'd heard it mentioned twice. Once when Julian leaned close and whispered, Be charming, she's connected. And once when a server nodded reverently in her direction. Clara, right? He mentioned you were in flowers. Event floristry, I said. And gallery assistance. I work part-time at the Meridian. She nodded the way people nod when they've stopped listening. Lovely. Her eyes drifted back to Julian. He's so talented, isn't he? Julian. We were all quite surprised he brought someone tonight. He usually comes to these things alone. I held my smile. It took effort. The kind of effort that sits in your jaw for days afterward. Before we return to the story, I just want to share a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, but the uncensored GL scenes and hotter videos will be available on my Patreon. Some moments are too spicy to include here, so if you want the fuller and bolder version, you can find the details in the description below. I excused myself from Beatrice before she could say anything else that required me to keep smiling through. The ballroom had a corridor off to the right where the noise softened slightly, where the catering staff moved quickly with silver trays and no one made eye contact. I stood there for a moment, pressing my fingertips against the cool of the wall, letting myself breathe. Julian found me there about 20 minutes later. Or rather, he found me and made it clear finding me was an interruption. There you are. His voice had the particular flatness that I'd learned meant he was managing me. Why are you hiding back here? I'm not hiding. I was talking to Beatrice Harrow. For about 30 seconds from what I heard. He adjusted his cufflinks. Clara, I need you to be present tonight. This matters. I am present. You're lurking by the kitchen. He said it quietly, pleasantly, the way he always said the things designed to cut. Ms. Vale's here tonight. You know who she is. I did. Everyone in Julian's world knew who Seraphina Vale was. CEO of Vale Hospitality Group, which owned a constellation of boutique luxury hotels, private event spaces, and what Julian described as the kind of client relationships you spend a decade trying to earn. She was Julian's boss's boss, which in his hierarchy made her something between a legend and a weather system. You didn't approach her. You made sure she noticed you only when the conditions were perfect. Then shouldn't you be making yourself look impressive? I asked, more gently than I meant to. That's what you're here for. He said it so naturally that it took me a moment to understand what he'd said. He'd already turned away, heading back toward the light and noise. I stood in the corridor a moment longer. That's what you're here for. The sentence followed me back into the ballroom like something stuck to my shoe. The evening unraveled in stages after that. the way humiliation always does. Not all at once, but in a series of small, precisely placed indignities. Julian corrected me when I mentioned a winery by the wrong name. He laughed along when Beatrice made a joke about creative types that was clearly aimed at me. He brought me to a conversation circle and then abandoned me there, drifting off with a client while I held my champagne glass and smiled at people who looked through me. Later, I noticed the strap on my left shoulder had come slightly loose. Not broken, just fraying, the way cheap things do under the pressure of pretending to be expensive. And when I excused myself to fix it in a powder room mirror, I looked at the woman in the glass for a long moment and thought, when did you get so tired? By 10:30, I couldn't find Julian anywhere. I circled the ballroom twice, checked the corridor, looked toward the private meeting rooms where I knew he sometimes took clients. A server told me, with careful neutrality, that Mr. Cross had stepped out about 40 minutes ago with a small group of guests. My phone showed 3% battery. I hadn't brought a charger because Julian had told me my bag was too big and I'd left it in his car, which was gone from the valet stand when I pushed through the glass doors of the Whitmore Hotel into the October night air. The cold hit me like a correction. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just cold. The kind that seeps through pale rose silk and reminds you that this dress was never built for the real world. I stood on the wide stone steps of the Whitmore and looked out at the street, at the pools of amber from the street lamps, at the rain that had started sometime in the last hour and was now falling in thin silver needles against the pavement. My shoes were not rain shoes. My dress was not rain clothing. I was standing outside a hotel where the cheapest room was probably $400 a night, with 3% battery on my phone and no coat. And the man I'd driven here with had left without me. I took my phone out and called him. Voicemail. I sent a text, "Where are you?" and watched the battery drop to 2% before the message even sent. A rideshare search told me there were no cars available in the area for the next 35 minutes. 35 minutes in October rain in heels that were already leaving small marks on the backs of my ankles. I sat down on the bottom step. Not because it was elegant or dignified, but because my feet hurt, and I was done pretending they didn't. The rain touched the back of my neck, and I thought, this is what it looks like when someone shows you who they are. This is the image you'll carry forward. Not the champagne, not the chandeliers, not that brief warm hand on your back at the beginning of the night. This. Stone steps, rain, a 2% battery. The certainty that no one is coming. My phone buzzed. Julian. Sorry. Had to leave early with Harrington and his people. Important opportunity. You can take an Uber, right? We'll talk tomorrow. You were a bit much tonight, honestly. Beatrice mentioned it. I read it twice. You were a bit much, as though my existence had been the thing that inconvenienced the evening. I turned the phone face down against my knee and looked at the street and let myself feel, for exactly one moment, the full weight of it. Then I pressed my lips together and told myself to think practically. There was a cafe 2 blocks down. I could use their Wi-Fi. I could call Lila. I could get dry. I was still sitting there, working up the will to move in the rain, when a black car pulled up to the curb. Not a taxi. Not a rideshare. A car that was several $1,000s of quiet confidence on 4 wheels, dark and long and perfectly polished, with that particular hush that expensive vehicles have, as if they're too well-bred for road noise. The driver stepped out before I'd processed what was happening. He was tall, unhurried, in a dark uniform jacket that the rain didn't seem to dare bother. He walked to the bottom of the steps and looked up at me with an expression that managed to be both professional and genuinely kind. Miss Wren? I stared at him. Yes. How do you know my name? My name is Adrian. I work for Ms. Vale. He held out a coat, black wool, perfectly folded, the kind of coat that had never doubted itself for a moment. She asked me to bring you somewhere warm. I didn't move immediately. Every reasonable instinct said, stranger, dark car, don't. But there was something about his composure that wasn't threatening. He wasn't performing urgency. He wasn't pushing. He simply stood there in the rain with a coat in his arms and waited, as if he had all the time in the world and no particular investment in what I decided. "Ms. Vale," I repeated. "Seraphina Vale." "Yes, miss." She doesn't know me. She knows you were left outside," he said simply, without judgment. "She thought you might like a coat." A pause. "There's also something in the car, if you'd like to look. No obligation. I can call you a taxi instead, or wait here with you until your ride arrives. Entirely your choice." I looked at the coat. I looked at the rain falling on his perfectly calm shoulders. I thought about the cafe 2 blocks away, and the Wi-Fi and Lila's voice and all the reasonable, independent things I could do, and then I thought about Julian's text. "You were a bit much." And something in me made a decision below the level of logic. I stood up. I took the coat. It smelled like expensive sandalwood and something cleaner underneath, like cool linen in winter. I wrapped it around my shoulders and followed Adrian to the car. On the back seat, resting against the leather as though it had been placed with intention, was a flat black box tied with a narrow ribbon, and on top of it, a note card. I picked up the note card first. The handwriting was spare and precise, the kind you get from someone who makes decisions without second-guessing them. It read, "You looked cold. There is a dress in the box if you want it. Adrian will bring you wherever you'd like to go. Home, a hotel room, or back inside. The choice is yours. SV." I sat with that note in my hands for longer than I meant to as the car moved smoothly through the rain-slicked streets. Back inside. She was offering me the option of going back. That detail undid me a little. She hadn't assumed I was done for the night. She hadn't assumed I was broken. She'd just noticed that I was cold and offered me options and signed it SV like she wasn't used to being anything other than an initial. "Where would you like to go, Miss Wren?" Adrian asked from the front. I looked down at the black box. Could I meet her? Ms. Vale?" A brief pause. "She's at the hotel, Suite 1403. I told him to take me there. The Whitmore had a private elevator for its upper floors, paneled in dark wood that smelled of cedar and age, and it moved so quietly going up that I only knew we'd arrived by the sound of the doors. Adrian had brought me as far as the corridor and then stepped back, pointing the way, and now I stood in front of a door that had no room number on it, just a subtle brass plate that indicated this was a place for people who didn't need to announce themselves. I knocked. The door opened. Seraphina Vale was not what the word powerful usually conjures. She wasn't large. She wasn't loud. She was standing in the center of a sitting room in a black dress so understated it had probably cost more than my car, and she was looking at me with dark eyes that were calm in the way deep water is calm. Not still, exactly, but deep enough that you couldn't see the movement. She was perhaps a decade older than me, and it showed not as aging, but as a rival. She'd become more herself with every year, I thought wildly, and most people never manage that. "Miss Wren," she said, "come in. You must be frozen." "I'm fine," I said reflexively, "because that's what you say." Something in her expression acknowledged the reflex without commenting on it. She moved toward the side table where a small electric kettle was steaming. "Tea?" I came inside. The room was enormous and warm and furnished in shades of charcoal and cream, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the city turning in the rain below. I realized I was still clutching the black box. "Thank you," I said. "For the coat. And for Adrian." Why?" She handed me a cup of tea. The cup was thin porcelain, warm between my palms. "Because I watched you stand on those steps for 11 minutes, she said, "and no one went out to you. Julian had a work opportunity." I know what Julian had. Her voice was measured, but there was something beneath it. "He left with Harrington's group." "I saw him go." She looked at me. "He didn't tell you he was leaving." It wasn't a question. I wrapped both hands around the tea. "He texted. Afterward? I didn't answer. She understood from the silence. The dress in the box, she said, moving on without pressing me, which I was grateful for. I had it brought from the boutique we use for last-minute event needs. It may or may not fit. I guessed from what I could see. You're welcome to change, if you'd like, or not. If you'd rather go home tonight, Adrian will take you. If you'd rather go back in, she tilted her head slightly toward the direction of the ballroom, many floors below. That's an option too. The evening is still going. Why would I go back? She was quiet for a moment. Because, she said carefully, you don't strike me as someone who leaves a room on someone else's terms. I looked at her. She looked back at me. Something about her gaze was unusual. Not invasive, but thorough. She looked at you like she was actually doing it. The bathroom is through there, she said. If you'd like to change and think about it. The bathroom was done in black marble and gold fixtures that were too restrained to be ostentatious and too perfect to be accidental. I set the box on the counter and untied the ribbon slowly. Inside, folded in layers of black tissue paper, was a dress. Not elaborate, no embellishment, no structure for the sake of structure. Just black silk that fell in a single clean line, with a neckline that was elegant and a hem that was exactly right. I held it up and looked at it in the mirror and thought, this dress knows what it's doing. I changed out of the pale rose silk, which had never quite been mine, and into the black. It fit like it had been made for a woman who knew where she was going, which was not a feeling I'd had in a long time. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself and felt something shift. Not vanity, not triumph, something quieter. Like finding a book you'd forgotten you owned and realizing the story had been waiting for you all along. I washed my face, blotted the smeared mascara, pulled my hair back simply. I looked, for the first time all night, like myself. When I came back out, Seraphina was standing at the window with her own tea, looking at the rain-blurred city below. She turned when she heard my footstep. She looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "There you are." Just that. As though she'd been looking for something and had found it, and the finding was quiet and certain. I felt it in the center of my chest, that gaze. I felt it the way you feel a lamp turning on in a room you'd accepted as dark. He was a fool, she said, to make you feel invisible in that dress downstairs. She said it simply, with no performance behind it. Not flattery, assessment. I'd like to go back in, I said. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like the possibility of one. Good. We went back into the ballroom together, and if I had thought the dress and the company and the angle of the evening would pass without notice, I was wrong. A subtle restructuring of attention, the way a room reorients when something significant has changed. Beatrice Harrow saw us from across the room, and her expression went through several interesting transformations before settling on careful blankness. Julian, standing by the bar with Harrington and two others, turned and stared at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. It took me a moment to identify it. Jealousy. Shock. The particular dismay of someone who has thrown something away and just watched someone else pick it up. Seraphina moved through the room like she always had, which was to say like someone who knew exactly where the center of gravity was. People inclined toward her. When she stopped to speak with a guest, she introduced me without fanfare. Clara Wren, I believe you know Julian's events coordinator. And the precision of that introduction, the way it gave me standing without making a production of it, was a kind of architecture. She was building something with words in real time, and I was learning the shape of it as she went. Julian appeared at my elbow halfway through the next hour. Clara, his voice was low and controlled. What are you doing? Standing here, I said pleasantly. With her. With Miss Vale, yes. He looked at Seraphina's back. She was speaking with someone else, 10 feet away, not looking at us. You should be careful, he said. She uses people. I turned and looked at him fully for the first time all evening. He was handsome, Julian. He'd always been handsome. Blue eyes, good jawline, the kind of confidence that gets mistaken for character. I'd spent 2 years in the warmth of that charm, mistaking the brightness of it for heat. She sent her driver for me, I said. You sent a text. He opened his mouth. I turned away. Later, in the car back, Seraphina's car again, but this time the two of us in the back seat, together with the city sliding past in the rain, I felt the evening descend on me all at once. The adrenaline had kept everything together, and now it was done. And what I was left with was the reality of it. I'd been left on a staircase. I'd needed a stranger's charity to get back into my own night. The man I'd been with for 2 years had texted me that I'd been a bit much. I put my hands together in my lap and stared at them and felt something come apart in my chest, quietly. Seraphina didn't try to talk me out of it. She didn't reach for my hand or offer me reassurance. She simply sat there beside me in the dark of the car, and her presence was enough, steady and real and not asking me to perform anything. After a while, I realized I was crying, not dramatically, just the leaking out kind of tears that come when you've held something too long. I wiped them with the back of my hand. I'm sorry, I said, because the reflex is strong. Don't apologize for that. I don't usually do this. I know you don't. She was quiet for a moment. You've been doing the opposite of this for quite some time, I think. I looked at her. In the dim of the car, with the city lights moving across her face, she looked less formidable somehow. Not less herself, but less defended. How long have you been watching us? Julian and me? Not watching, she said. Noticing. There's a difference. She looked forward. He treats the people who serve him beautifully, and the people who love him carelessly. I've had employees like him. I've had to decide what to do with them. What did you decide? She looked at me. That people like that cost more than they're worth. The car stopped outside my building. I'd given the address to Adrian without thinking about it. Seraphina walked me to my door. Not to the lobby. To my door on the 4th floor, which she did without comment, as though it were ordinary. When I unlocked the latch and turned to say goodnight, I found her looking at me with that same thorough gaze. Will you be all right? She asked. I'll be fine, I said. And this time, it was less of a reflex and more of a decision. She nodded once. The dress, she said. Keep it. She was gone before I could answer. I went inside and sat on my small sofa in the black silk dress and the sandalwood-scented coat that I'd forgotten to give back, and I looked at my apartment, the secondhand cushions, the trailing ivy on the windowsill, the vase of ranunculus I'd brought home from the studio last Thursday that were starting to go faded at the edges. And I thought about a woman who'd seen me sitting on stone steps in the rain and decided, for reasons I didn't yet understand, that I was worth a coat and a car and a dress and a walk to my door. I put the coat around my shoulders and fell asleep on the sofa, and I dreamed of nothing, which was the most peaceful thing I could have asked for. Lila came over the next morning with coffee and the kind of expression she wore when she had opinions, and was working out the diplomatic order in which to deploy them. Tell me everything, she said, before she'd even taken off her jacket. I told her everything. The party, Beatrice, the text, the steps, the car. The dress, Seraphina Vale at the window with tea, the way she'd said, "There you are," the walk to my door. Lila sat with her coffee for a long moment when I finished. Okay, she said finally. So he abandoned you, and his incredibly powerful, by all accounts terrifying, incredibly beautiful boss sent her driver to collect you, gave you a designer dress, walked you to your door, and told you to keep the dress. Yes, Clara, I know. That's not a coincidence. That's not just kindness. I don't know what it is, I said honestly. She's intimidating. She looks at you like she's already decided several things about you, and none of them are wrong. Lila set her cup down. And you're going to see her again? I don't know. She didn't say. She just said good night. She walked you to your door and told you to keep the dress. Lila, I'm just establishing facts. She looked at me very seriously. How do you feel? Not about her, about Julian. I looked at my hands. They were a florist's hands, small cuts from wire, soil in the creases, permanently slightly dry. I'd always been a little embarrassed of them in Julian's world. I think I've known for a long time, I said slowly, that I was holding something that wasn't holding me back. I just kept hoping that if I got the dress right, or said the right things, or was good enough at fitting into his world, it would matter. It would change something. And did it? I got left on the steps, I said. In the rain. Lila reached across the table and covered my hands with hers. Good riddance, she said, with great warmth and precision. 3 days passed. I went back to the studio, cut stems, arranged whites and creams for a gallery opening, designed a sympathy arrangement for someone I didn't know and probably never would. I sorted dried lavender and tied it into bundles. I moved through the small space with its scent of greenery and cold water and felt something slightly different about myself. Not repaired, not quite, but less like I'd lost something, and more like I'd set something down. On the 4th day, a request came through my studio's online contact form. A floristry commission for an upcoming private event, high volume, luxury spec, white ranunculus, garden roses, eucalyptus, greenery, candle arrangements for 20 tables, gallery-style installation for the entrance wall. Payment significantly above market rate. Company, Vale Hospitality Group. Contact, J. Park, Events Coordinator. I read it 3 times. I could have told myself it was coincidental. Someone else at the company could have found me. But the request specifically named the Meridian Gallery, where I worked part-time, as a reference point, and the only person at that party who'd have known I worked there was the woman I'd told one evening, standing in a coat that smelled of sandalwood. I accepted the commission. I told myself it was business. I told Lila it was business. Lila gave me a look that I chose to ignore. The event was at one of Vale Hospitality's properties, the Alderton, a boutique hotel in the old quarter of the city with arched ceilings and floors of original parquet, and the particular grace of a building that had been beautiful for a century and knew it. I arrived 2 hours early to set up, with the van packed and my assistant Carmen beside me, and we worked efficiently through the morning, building the entrance installation and dressing the tables, and turning the ballroom into something that looked like a garden had walked indoors and decided to stay. Seraphina arrived when we were 3/4 done. I heard her voice first, low, unhurried, asking someone a question about the lighting rig. And then she appeared in the doorway, and I felt my hands slow without choosing to. She was in charcoal today, different from the black of the party, warmer somehow, as though she'd allowed herself 1 degree of softness. She looked at the room, and then she looked at me, and she walked over. The entrance wall, she said. It's extraordinary. Thank you. I kept my hands in the greenery. The ranunculus took some sourcing. I had to call 3 suppliers. It shows. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the installation. Wild garden roses, threaded through eucalyptus, pale and green, and something like a dream. I thought about calling, she said. After that night, I wasn't sure if it would be welcome. I looked up from the stems. So you commissioned $500 of floristry instead. Something moved in her expression. It was business, she said, and it was the most self-aware deadpan I'd ever heard from someone in a position of power. I laughed. A small laugh, surprised out of me. She looked at my face when I laughed the way you look at a thing that has exceeded your expectations. Have lunch with me, she said, after you're done here. I thought about Lila's face. I thought about the black dress hanging in my closet, which I had not returned and had not moved, which I looked at sometimes on my way past without quite understanding what I felt. "All right," I said. Lunch was not at a place I would have expected. She took me to a diner 3 blocks from the Alderton, small and bright, with vinyl booth seats and a laminated menu and a counter where the cook called every customer by a number. Seraphina Vale sat in a red vinyl booth and looked at the laminated menu with the focused attention she probably gave quarterly reports, and ordered a grilled cheese and black coffee. And I felt the world make one of those small adjustments that mean everything. "You come here?" I asked. "I came once," she said. "2 years ago. I was in the area and my meeting ran over. I've thought about the grilled cheese since." "You thought about a diner's grilled cheese for 2 years?" She looked up. "When I find something worth going back to," she said carefully, "I don't let it go easily." I looked at the table. I looked at the menu. I ordered the soup. We talked for 2 hours, which was longer than either of us intended and neither of us acknowledged. She told me about the hospitality business, the way you talk about something you're deeply inside. Not from the outside, not as a resume, but as a texture, as weather. I told her about floristry the same way. About how the studio had been my father's first, a small shop that he'd kept running until his hands couldn't, and how I'd inherited it, and the debt with it, and had spent 3 years turning both into something I was proud of. She listened the way she looked, completely, without agenda. "You've built something real," she said. "It's small." Small isn't a criticism. She looked at me steadily. "I started with 12 rooms and a restaurant that seated 42 people. Vale Hospitality. Before it was that, yes." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, and it was the first time I noticed that, the small human gesture of wrapping both hands around warmth. It was just a building I'd scraped together enough to renovate, because I needed something that was mine. Something that couldn't be taken. "What were you afraid of having taken?" She was quiet for a moment. "Everything I'd worked for," she said. I was underestimated, early on. There were people who assumed that whatever I managed to build would be built on someone else's foundation. That I wasn't the kind of person who starts things, only benefits from them. Her voice was measured, but I could hear the old heat beneath it, controlled the way fire under glass is controlled. I had to become unignorable. I thought about that, about the architecture of her composure, how it hadn't been given to her, how it had been built, brick by deliberate brick, against the cold. "Is that why you—" "That night," I said carefully. "Why you noticed." She looked at me. "I noticed because you were sitting on those steps, with your spine straight and your chin up," she said. "And you were clearly devastated, and you were absolutely refusing to let it show to anyone who walked past. And I recognized it." A pause. "It's a particular kind of dignity, the kind that takes everything you have." I felt the back of my throat tighten. I looked at my soup. "I'm not going to apologize for sending Adrian," she said, "but I want you to know it wasn't pity." "Then what was it?" She thought about it, and I appreciated that she thought about it rather than answering fast. "Fury, partly," she said. "I've watched Julian Cross perform competence for 3 years. He's very good at performing, and I've seen how he treats the people he considers below him when no one's watching." She looked at the table. "And partly, I wanted to." She looked up. "I wanted you to have somewhere warm to go. I'm not sure I can be more articulate than that." We walked back toward the Alderton in the cold afternoon, and the light was the low gold of October, and the leaves on the street were wet and dark. And I thought, I do not know what this is, but it is something. I know that much. The weeks that followed were quiet on the surface and everything else beneath it. Julian called twice. The first time I didn't answer. The second time I did, and he said he'd heard I was working with Seraphina Vale, and his voice had a particular quality, wounded, proprietary, slightly afraid, that told me everything I needed to know about why he was calling. "Clara," he said, "I know the other night I should have handled it better. Can we talk? We are talking, I said. I mean in person. There's nothing to discuss in person that isn't true over the phone, Julian. A silence. Is something happening? With her? That's not a conversation I'm having with you. She's using you, Clara, to get at me, to make a point. She's done this kind of thing before. I thought about the diner, about grilled cheese and 2 hours of being listened to and the way she'd said I recognized it. Goodbye, Julian, I said, and ended the call, and sat with the strange new silence of having put something down that I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten its weight. The next commission was larger. Seraphina's team booked the studio for a series of arrangements for 3 of the Vale properties. Quarterly refreshes, she called it, which meant ongoing work, reliable income, the kind of professional foundation I'd been trying to build for years. Carmen and I could barely keep up with the scale of it, and I had to bring on a third part-time hand, and the studio stopped smelling like debt and started smelling like possibility. I told myself it was professional. I told myself the steady stream of work was simply business, and that my complicated feelings were a separate matter that I was managing with dignity. But the feelings did not cooperate with the management. There was an evening in late October when a pipe behind my studio wall started leaking, and I spent 3 hours on the phone with a plumber who couldn't come until morning, and I was sitting on the floor of the back room with a towel and a mop and the special kind of exhausted that comes from being a small business owner with an emergency and nobody to call. And my phone rang. Seraphina. I answered without thinking. "You sound wet," she said. "I have a leak." I explained the situation in clipped, practical terms because my dignity was already compromised by the towel. She was quiet for a moment. "I know a plumber. His name is Goran. He does all the Vale properties. I'll send him tonight." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." A pause. "Clara, let me send him." Goran arrived at 9:30, fixed the pipe by 10:15, refused payment with a cheerful wave, and left. I sat in the dry back room afterward and looked at my phone for a long time, and then I called Lila. "She sent her plumber," I said. "Clara," Lila said. "I know." "Sweetie." "I know, Lila. You are so... I know." There was the afternoon I was delivering to the Alderton and walked past Seraphina's car and found Adrian standing beside it with a flask of coffee that he offered me without preamble, and we stood together in the cold for 10 minutes while he told me, in the oblique way of someone who is professionally loyal but personally fond, that Ms. Vale had canceled 2 meetings that afternoon to handle a contract issue with a vendor who had, he chose his words with care, been ungenerous in their dealings with a smaller supplier. I asked whose supplier. He said he couldn't say. He handed me the coffee flask and looked at the sky. I thought about the commission that had come through 2 weeks ago for the studio. A contract for the Alderton's lobby arrangements that was worth enough to replace my van. I thought about the vendor who'd been undercharging me for 3 years, suddenly raising my rates by 40% and then, inexplicably, reversing the decision 3 days later with a brief, slightly stiff apology. I handed back the flask. "Tell her," I said carefully, "that I appreciate practical gestures." Adrian smiled at the sky. "I'll pass that along." Then Seraphina came to the studio on a Tuesday morning unannounced, in a coat the color of midnight, and stood in the doorway, looking at the buckets of blooms with an expression of such pure, unguarded wonder that I forgot what I was doing with my hands. "I didn't realize," she said, walking slowly between the shelves, "how many there are. It's a working studio. We order twice weekly." She stopped in front of a bucket of garden roses, blush pink, just barely open. She touched one petal with the edge of one finger. "What does this one mean?" "Grace," I said. "And gratitude. And sometimes a first love that isn't quite sure of itself yet." She looked at the rose. Then she looked at me. "And this?" She moved to another, deep burgundy, almost black at the edges. "That's a black baccara. It means unconscious beauty and deep, complicated longing. She was quiet. Flowers are more specific than I thought. They have a whole language, I said. People in the 19th century used it to say things they couldn't say out loud. She looked at me for a moment. That sounds like an exhausting way to communicate. It's actually quite elegant. You could have an entire conversation without saying a word. She reached into the bucket and lifted one black baccara stem, held it. Could I buy this one? You can have it, I said. I have 40 of them. She took it. She said thank you in a way that meant something else. There was a rooftop garden on the Alderton that I'd been contracted to refresh for the winter season. Hardy greens, evergreen topiaries, white cyclamen in ceramic pots. I went up twice in November, and once Seraphina appeared behind me when I was halfway through repotting a boxwood, and we ended up sitting on a small bench at the edge of the roof for an hour, looking at the city falling into evening below us, our breath making small white clouds in the cold air. I'm afraid, I said, without fully planning to. I was looking at the lights coming on across the city. She turned. Of what? Of being wrong again? I said. Of thinking something is real when I'm the only one who's decided it's real. I looked at my gloved hands. I did that for 2 years. I convinced myself Julian's version of caring was caring. I was very persuasive, with myself. You weren't wrong about caring, she said. You were wrong about who deserved it. I looked at her. You cared truly, she said. That's not a flaw. That's a very particular kind of courage, actually, to keep caring accurately in a world that punishes it. She looked away. I lost that years ago. The capacity to care without a contingency plan. A pause. I find it difficult to be around you sometimes. Why? Because you make me want to try again. She said it to the city, not to me. And I'm not sure I remember how. The cold was deep by the time we climbed down from the roof, and neither of us had said anything else. And the space between what had been said and what hadn't been said was enormous and warm and frightening. And I took a taxi home and sat in the back seat, feeling like I'd survived something significant and wasn't sure yet what it was. The fight happened in her office. I had come to deliver a proposal for the spring gala floristry, a formal meeting, professional. Her office was on the 23rd floor of a building in the financial district, all glass and restraint, with a view of the city that seemed to confirm her authority simply by existing. She read the proposal, she approved it, and then she looked up and said, "The spring gala is in March. I'd like you to be there, as my guest, not as the florist." I sat with that for a moment. Your guest? Yes. Not the event coordinator. No. I stood up. I was not entirely sure why, but standing felt necessary. Seraphina. She watched me. I don't know what you're doing, I said. And I've been telling myself it's business, but it's not business. And I've been telling myself you're just kind, but you're not just kind. You're doing something. And I need to know if you're trying to fix me. The words came out faster than I meant them to. Because I was humiliated and you saw it, and now you're giving me work and inviting me to galas, and I don't want to be a project. I don't want to be the thing you rescued and felt responsible for. I have enough. I've spent enough time being something someone did because they felt they should. She was very still throughout this. Not defensive, not surprised exactly. Listening. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You're not a project, she said. Then what am I? She stood up slowly, came around the desk, stopped a foot away from me, which was close enough that I could see the precise restraint in her expression. The effort it took, she who controlled everything to not control this. You're the person I've been thinking about, she said quietly. Since before I sent Adrian for you, since I watched you talking to Beatrice Harrow with that smile you wore to protect yourself, and I thought, there is someone who is more than this room deserves. She held very still. And every time I try to be practical about it, every time I tell myself you need space and time and I should keep this professional, you say something real, or you touch a flower like it matters, or you laugh, and She stopped. Her jaw tightened. I am not trying to fix you. There is nothing wrong with you to fix. I breathed. I'm trying, she said very quietly. Not to want you so much that I make a mistake I can't take back. What mistake? Reaching before you're ready. I looked at her. The city was vast and bright behind her through the glass, and she was standing there in her controlled, guarded, painstakingly constructed composure. And I could see the seams of it, where the effort showed, and I thought, she is braver than she knows. She is doing the thing she most fears and doing it standing up. I stepped forward. I kissed her. She went still for exactly one moment, one breath of stillness, and then she kissed me back. And it was nothing like the performing warmth of Julian's charm. It was real, it was careful, and then not careful. It was both of us deciding something at the same time. And when I finally stepped back, my hands were shaking slightly, and her composure was the most exquisitely undone I had ever seen it. I'm ready, I said. There was a week in November that nearly undid everything before it had fully begun. It started with Lila, who meant well and said the thing she said out of love, but said it at the wrong moment. We were at her kitchen table with wine, and I was talking about Seraphina. Not carefully, not with the self-protective distance I'd been maintaining in my own head, but openly and warmly, the way you talk about someone when you've stopped pretending you're not affected. And Lila set down her glass and said gently, Clara, you went from one relationship directly into the orbit of a very powerful woman who started paying attention to you the night you were most vulnerable. I just want to make sure you know the difference between being rescued and being chosen. I didn't sleep well that night. By morning, the doubt had grown. Not about Seraphina's character. Nothing I'd seen of her was dishonest. But about my own. About whether I'd let need make a decision that should have been made from steadiness. About whether I was still the woman on the steps, looking for a coat, and had simply upgraded my gratitude into something that felt like love, because love was what I wanted to feel. I canceled our Thursday dinner. I said I was busy. I was not busy. I went to the studio and worked until midnight, which was something I did when I was avoiding my own thoughts. Carmen found me there the next morning, asleep on the stool with my cheek on my arms and pruning shears still in one hand, and said with great gentleness that I looked terrible and should go home. I went home. The black dress was hanging on the back of my closet door where I'd put it after the Whitmore, and I stood in front of it for a long time. The silk had a quality in the morning light that it hadn't had at night, less dramatic, more precise. It was just a dress, a very beautiful dress, but also the first thing someone had given me in a very long time that had no strings attached. Come back in or go home. The choice is yours. She had always given me the choice. Seraphina texted on the third day of my silence, I noticed you've been quiet. No pressure. I just want to make sure you're all right. I sat with the message for an hour. Then I went to her office. She was at her desk when her assistant let me in, and she looked up, and the relief she didn't entirely suppress, the slight release of tension in her shoulders, the breath, told me something her words might have carefully edited. I got afraid, I said. I needed a few days to make sure that what I feel isn't just gratitude, or transference, or convenience. She nodded once, waiting. It isn't, I said. Any of those things. I checked. How did you check? I spent 3 days avoiding you and feeling terrible, I said. And then I stood in front of the dress and thought about all the moments you gave me a choice instead of a direction. And I realized that the thing that's happening, the thing I feel, exists because of who you are. Not because of what you did on one particular night. She was very still. I'm not made of that night, I said. I'm not the woman on the steps. Or I am, but that's not all I am. And what I feel about you isn't gratitude for the rescue. It's I stopped, looked at her. You laugh like someone knocked something loose. You read in the bathtub and fall asleep and flood the bathroom. You send plumbers at 9:30 at night and pretend it's nothing. You remembered a book I mentioned once in passing and read it. You sat on my studio floor in your good coat. Her expression had gone through several things while I talked and arrived somewhere exposed and quiet. I love you, I said. That's the check I ran. That's the result. She stood up. She crossed the room. She put both hands on my face and looked at me the way she always looked at things that mattered, completely without agenda, and said, I have been in love with you since you laughed at my diner order. The grilled cheese, she confirmed, and kissed me, and this time neither of us had any stillness left to spare. The next few weeks were the warmest I could remember. Not without complexity. There was complexity. There was the particular awkwardness of two guarded people learning to be unguarded with each other, of figuring out each other's edges and silences, and the small specific ways that each of us had learned to protect ourselves. Seraphina was careful with me, careful in a way that was not distance but intention, always making sure I had the option to step back, always asking rather than assuming. I found myself learning to ask for things, which had never come easily, to say, I'd like this, and this matters to me, and I need this. To trust that expressing need would not cost me what I needed. She came to the studio on a Sunday when I was working late, and I found her sitting on the wooden stool in the corner that Carmen usually occupied, reading a book she'd brought, and the image of her. This woman who made powerful people nervous without raising her voice, sitting in my small flower-scented studio with a paperback, made something inside me settle so completely and permanently that I knew without drama, without fanfare, that I was not going to be able to go back to how things had been. What are you reading? I asked. She showed me the cover, a novel I'd mentioned once in passing at the diner. She'd remembered and found it and was reading it. I went back to my stems. Seraphina. I think I love you. She looked up from the book. She looked at me across the small room with its cold water and greenery and the one lamp I kept burning when I worked late. She said, I know. You know, I've been fairly certain for some time, she said. I didn't want to say it before you did. It seemed important that you get there first. I stared at her. Why? Because you spent 2 years with someone who made you feel like your feelings were inconvenient, she said. I wanted you to know that yours would always, here with me, come first. I sat down on the floor in the middle of my studio, among the fallen petals and the wire scraps and the damp, and I pressed my hands over my face, and Seraphina put her book down and came and sat beside me on the floor, in her good coat, on the floor, and put her arm around me, and we sat there in the cold light of the studio for a long time, without saying anything at all. And I thought, this is what it feels like. This is what it was supposed to feel like all along. The charity gala happened in December, and it was the gala that brought the complications I had perhaps been half expecting and half hoping to avoid. It was a large event, the annual fundraiser for the Whitmore Arts Foundation, which meant that half the city's power structure was in one room, and the social dynamics had the particular, pressurized quality of people performing generosity at each other. Julian was there. Beatrice Harrow was there. And a week before the event, a photograph had appeared in one of the city's gossip columns, Seraphina and I leaving a restaurant, clearly together, and the caption had been the kind of carefully worded innuendo that implies everything while committing to nothing. Seraphina had read it and set down her coffee and said, "Shall I be irritated or shall I not bother?" And I'd said, "Not bother." And she'd agreed. But I'd felt it, the slight tightening in my chest that came from knowing people were looking and deciding what the looking meant. Someone at my studio booking had asked, with faux casual brightness, "Is it true you're connected to Seraphina Vale, personally?" And I'd said yes and smiled, and felt them recalculate me with an expression that made me feel both elevated and reduced. Elevated because she conferred status, reduced because my status was suddenly contingent on her. At the gala, I found a corner early and assessed the room. Seraphina was in conversation across the space. She moved through these events like a current, inevitable and calm. And I was, for the first time in months, alone in a crowded room and choosing it, which was different. Julian caught my eye across a cluster of guests and moved toward me with the deliberate casualness of someone who has rehearsed an encounter. Clara, he looked well. He'd always been good at looking well. You look different. I feel different. He glanced toward where Seraphina stood. Is it serious? Yes. He absorbed this. I want to say... He stopped, started again. I know how things ended. I know I wasn't kind, I offered. He winced. I was under pressure. I wasn't seeing things clearly. I know I made you feel like an accessory, I said. Like something you brought for show. Like something you could text and abandon in the rain. His jaw tightened. That's not entirely... Julian. I kept my voice level. Not angry, not cold. Just clear. You left me on the steps. You told me I'd been a bit much. You came back when I became interesting to you again. I looked at him steadily. I hope things work out for you. I genuinely do. But I won't be revisiting this. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once and moved away. I breathed. I was fine. I was actually fine. What I didn't see was Beatrice Harrow, who had been standing close enough to overhear and who had her own reasons to be interested in the story. She moved through the room and spoke to several people. And later I learned what she'd said, that I had inserted myself into Seraphina's business circle through personal manipulation, that it was unfortunate for the Vale Company's reputation, that everyone knew Clara Wren was using the situation. The words made their rounds the way words do in rooms like that, gathering credibility simply from the confidence with which they were delivered. I heard some of it. Not all of it. But enough. I found myself in the corridor outside the ballroom, which had a cold familiarity. Corridors outside ballrooms. Clara Wren, not quite inside and not quite out. I stood against the wall and thought clearly about what I was feeling. Not panic, not shame, even though shame tried. Something older and more stubborn. The thing that had kept my spine straight on the steps in the rain. The thing Seraphina had recognized before I had. I went back inside. Beatrice was in the center of a group of 4. I walked up to them. Beatrice turned and I watched her expression calibrate. Clara, she said. I heard what you were just, I said pleasantly. I'd like to address it. I looked at the group. I was abandoned outside this hotel 2 months ago. That's a fact. Seraphina Vale's driver brought me a coat and a car because it was raining and she saw someone left alone. She wasn't manipulated into it. She chose to. I looked back at Beatrice. I run a floristry business. I have clients, including the Vale properties. I didn't manufacture those relationships. I earned them the same way I earn all my work, with my hands and my expertise and a lot of early mornings. And I'm not a scandal. I'm a person. A pause. I'd appreciate if you treated me like one. The group was very quiet. Beatrice opened her mouth, closed it. I thanked them for their time and walked away. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. I noted this with something like pride. Clara. I turned. Seraphina was there, 3 feet away. She had the expression she got when something had exceeded her expectations. Restrained, but luminous. She'd been close enough to hear, I realized. She'd stayed back. Let me speak. I heard that, she said. I know. She stepped forward. Are you all right? Yes, I said. Actually, yes. She touched my face, just briefly. With the backs of 2 fingers, tilting her head slightly to look at me. The gesture was private and public at the same time. Not possessive, not performative. Simply real and visible and chosen. "For the record," she said, her voice quiet and entirely steady, "Clara is here tonight as my partner. Not my liability, not my project, not a story that needs explaining. My partner." She said it to me, not to the room, even though the room could hear. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it plainly. I leaned into her hand. "You're not late," I said. "You're right on time." There is a particular quality to winter mornings after something has been settled, a specific quality of light and warmth and the absence of waiting. I know this because I learned it in December and January and the February that followed, the months in which everything became itself, quietly and without ceremony. We spent those months learning each other in all the ordinary ways that matter most. I learned that Seraphina took her coffee so dark it was nearly hostile, that she read in the bath and fell asleep in the bath and had flooded her bathroom twice, that she had a very specific laugh reserved for things that caught her genuinely off guard, a short, helpless sound, like someone had knocked something loose, and that the only thing that reliably produced it was me being honest when I hadn't planned to be. She learned that I kept my best conversations for when I was working with my hands, that I was frightened of being ordinary in a way that was different from being frightened of being overlooked, that I put flowers in every room because my father had done it, and the smell meant home. She came to the studio on Thursday evenings with her laptop and worked in the corner while I worked at the table, and the companionable quiet of two people who didn't need to perform for each other became the thing I looked forward to most in my week. I went to her penthouse on weekends, and the high glass and cool space of it softened somehow with the things I brought without meaning to. A ranunculus left in a glass of water, a paperback, the habit of leaving the kitchen window open for the cold air. She did not tell me to stop. She rearranged the ranunculus to catch more light. Adrian, when I saw him, picking Seraphina up on occasions, dropping her off, had the expression of someone who had known a long time how things would go and was satisfied to have been right. He called me Miss Wren for months until Seraphina told him to stop, and then he switched to Clara with a warmth that had always been behind the professionalism. In March, the Alderton held its spring gala, which I had designed entirely. An entrance wall of white garden roses and trailing ivy and hundreds of ranunculus in shades of cream and blush, 20 tables each, a small wilderness. The whole room turned into a garden that could not have existed in nature, but felt as though it had. I stood in the finished ballroom an hour before the guests arrived and looked at what I'd made, and I felt the kind of satisfaction that doesn't have language for itself, only sensation. Seraphina came up behind me. She stood at my shoulder, looking at the room. "There," she said softly. "There what?" "That." She gestured at the room, at the whole of it, the flowers and the light, and the thing I'd made. "That's what you were carrying when I first saw you. That capacity. All of that." I looked at the room I'd made out of stems and water and wire and early mornings. I thought about the woman who'd stood on cold steps in pale rose silk that wasn't hers, and the woman standing here now, and the distance between them, which was enormous and which I had walked every step of myself. "I kept the dress," I said. She turned to look at me. "I know. I look at it sometimes. The black one." "What does it mean to you now?" she asked. "When you look at it." I thought about it honestly, about the night I'd put it on in a marble bathroom and looked in the mirror and felt something awaken. About the moment she'd said, "There you are," and what it had meant to be seen, simply and completely, without agenda. About everything that had come after. The diner, the rooftop, the studio floor, the gala corridor, all of it. The long, unhurried process of choosing each other. "It means the night I stopped being invisible," I said. She reached out and took my hand. Not as a gesture, as a fact. Her hand in mine warm and certain. "You were never invisible," she said. "You were just with someone who couldn't see." The guests arrived in an hour, the room filled with light and conversation and the scent of roses, and somewhere in the middle of it, among the flowers I'd grown and arranged and made into something beautiful, Seraphina Vale turned to me with that rare luminous expression she saved for things that exceeded her expectations, and I thought, I am not at the edge of this world anymore. I am not holding my breath, waiting to be asked to leave. I am here, and I am wanted, and I am home. The ranunculus were fading at the edges by the time we left, the way they do when they've given everything. And the city outside was all late-night amber and wet pavement, and the particular quiet of a place still breathing after celebration. She kept her hand in mine in the back of the car, and Adrian didn't say anything at all, which was his finest quality, and the black dress hung in my closet at home like a kept promise. And spring was coming up through the cold city ground, and I was not afraid.